The Pope in Latin, Papa, which means father, is known as the Supreme Pontiff, or Greatest Priest. He is the Bishop of Rome, an ex officio leader of the worldwide Catholic Church. Since the 20th century, more exactly, in 1929, the Pope is the head of the State of Vatican. His office is called the Papacy. The jurisdiction of the Episcopal See is called the Holy See. The Holy See is the sovereign entity of international law, located in the independent city-state of Vatican, established in 1929. Founded in the 1st century by Saints Peter and Paul, according to Catholic tradition, here is the central point of the Catholic world. As a sovereign entity, the Holy See is headquartered in, operates from, and exercises exclusive dominion over the independent Vatican city-state, which is enclaved in Rome, Italy, of which the Pope is sovereign. The primacy of the Bishop of Rome is largely derived from his role as the apostolic successor to Saint Peter, to whom primacy was conferred by Jesus, giving him the keys of heaven and the powers of binding and loosing, naming him as the rock upon which the church would be built. The papacy is one of the most enduring and important institutions in the whole world, and it has had an important role in the history of Europe and the world. Currently, in addition to the expansions of the Christian faith and doctrine as it was back in the days when this was the biggest mission of the institution, today, the popes are involved in dialogues, speeches about equality and peace, charity, the defense of human rights, and in appearing as a model from which the world may receive a sort of guidance. Well, some centuries ago, the Pope was more powerful than today, but not every time. As this question, how powerful was a king in medieval times, cannot be answered properly, because it depends on other factors. Our question about the Pope cannot be answered properly due to the same reasons. There were many popes, different characters with different personalities in different times. Thus, some popes were not as saint and good-guided as others, as in the case of kings or rulers of all times. Things were not always the same. The Christian world, or more exactly after 1054, the Catholic world, was ruled by weak, mediocre, powerful, good-guided, bad-guided, influential, or influenced bishops. The doctrine of the Roman Catholic Church that the Pope, by reason of his office as Vicar of Christ and as pastor of the entire Christian Church, has full supreme and universal power over the whole Church, changed the history. The doctrine had the most significance in the relationship between the Church and the temporal state, in such matters as ecclesiastic privileges, the actions of monarchs, and even successions. The creation of the term papal supremacy dates back in the 1st centuries after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, which was the beginning of the rise of the bishops of Rome, to not just the position of religious authority, but the power to be the ultimate ruler of the kingdoms within the Christian community, called the Christendom, in a period dominated by religion. Being seen as the head of the church, the Pope had an immense spiritual power over Christian subjects, having influence over them. A king who had some issues or rivalries with His Holiness could have had a difficult period, as the neighbors of that king who resisted the Pope's will would have been glad of an opportunity to invade, take some territories, gain more power, and punish such a king. Also, some rules were at a big distance, but sometimes the people could have been still faithful to the distant Pope over the local king. Another phase in the process of papal supremacy's rise to prominence, when the Pope had a lot of power, is the period from 11th to the mid-13th century. Gregory VII is considered one of the great reforming popes, but also other sources describe him as rough and violent. He was known for his role in the conflict between church and state in medieval Europe, over the ability to install high church officials. By undercutting imperial power, the controversy led to nearly 50 years of civil war in Germany. His actions created civil and ecclesiastical strife in Germany and Italy, known as the Investiture Controversy, a game for power. The Pope wanted to have the authority to invest local church officials. Perhaps the most notable action of the Pope in medieval times was the call for crusades. Papal supremacy was also increased when Urban II called for a crusade in 1095. in an attempt to liberate and retake the Holy Land from Muslim domination. He promised forgiveness and pardon for all of the past sins of those who would fight to reclaim the Holy Land and free the Eastern churches. Under papal leadership, the aggressive energies of the European nobility. Urban also gave support to the Crusades in Spain against the Moors there. Pope Urban was concerned that the focus on the East and Jerusalem would neglect the fight in Spain. Urban died on the 29th of July, 1099, 14 days after the fall of Jerusalem to the Crusaders, but before news of the event had reached Italy. Such powerful popes as Alexander III, Innocent III, Gregory IX, and Innocent IV mastered a primacy over the church that attempted to gain a jurisdictional supremacy and great influence over emperors and kings of Europe in temporal and spiritual affairs. Speaking about the rest of the Middle Ages, popes struggled with monarchs over power. A period known as the Avignon Papacy arose from the conflict between the papacy and the French crown. This culminated in the death of Pope Boniface VIII after his arrest and maltreatment by Philip IV of France. Following the further death of Pope Benedict XI, Philip, the King of France, forced the election of the French Clement V as Pope in 1305. Clement refused to move to Rome, and in 1309 he moved his court to the papal enclave at Avignon. A total of 7 French popes reigned at Avignon. In 1376, Gregory XI abandoned Avignon and moved his court to Rome. After that period, a kind of civil war will start. 2 or 3 men claimed to be popes, but the situation was resolved afterwards. Some of the popes in the Middle Ages became powerful and highly influential. This was the period of the Crusades, where thousands of medieval Christians, rich and poor, old and young, from all walks of life, traveled nearly 3,000 miles to the Holy Land. The Catholic Church became the universal and unifying institution. However, in 1054, there was a split between the Eastern and Western Christian churches, which was prompted by arguments over the Crusades. The religious zeal of the popes in medieval times transferred into medieval society. A centralized Catholic Church was realized under Pope Innocent III in 1198. The Church and the power of the popes was eventually weakened by quarrels between church and state. At one time, the Pope had power over a king, and afterwards, a king was more powerful. The 100 Years' War and the Wars of Roses led to the end of the feudal system and the emergence of the modern nation-state. The medieval religious reformers of the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance culminated in the Protestant Reformation. I know that you probably expected to talk about Henry VIII of England, but don't worry, this is a topic for another video. This question cannot be answered exactly, but there wasn't a single pope or single period. The pope was not more powerful than sovereign kings in Europe. There have been very powerful popes through history, and their holiness had great influence to some kingdoms, especially against Muslims, heretics, non-believers, or excommunicated kings. Yes, a pope could excommunicate a member of the church if some rules were crossed. Throughout history, many popes basically answered to a king that sponsored their election and navigated through alliance to preserve their position. So the game of power was present back in these days. In conclusion, the average pope was maybe more powerful than smaller kingdoms. The strength of the papacy was the faith of the people and the close relationship between the crown and God. If someone attacked the pope, this could have led to more conflict with other kingdoms. The attacker would risk excommunication, among other things, that could potentially cause great damage. Also, it was more often an advantage to stay on the good side of the pope, due to his influence, so he can help you with claims on lands you desire, especially if the lands were held by non-believers or enemies of His Holiness. Being very powerful or not, it wasn't a good strategy to have the Pope as an enemy. Why? Well, you are in medieval Europe, and he is in the chair of St. Peter, and maybe more will join him. Kings supported popes, and popes supported kings. It was like a symbiosis. They worked together and had conflicts too, based on different reasons. We are looking to create more interesting history videos about antiquity and medieval periods, so be sure to subscribe and hit the bell button to learn more. This video is made possible due to the generosity of our 11 supporters on Patreon. You can support our work by pledging a little donation there, and by doing so, we will create more quality videos, and your name will be displayed at the end of the video. Thanks for watching, see you next time.